Just a quick rant to start with. We're talking about state control, state-sponsored control of the sort of geopolitical landscape. And I don't know how many of you are aware of what's been going on Google/YouTube in the last sort of year or so, where they've changed all the algorithms for searches, but this only seems to apply to controversial topics. So for example, if you search for music and things like that, everything comes up and all the related links come up in place, related genre, style of music. But if you type in something like 9/11 conspiracy, instead of what you used to get, which was a list of relevant films and documentaries on the topic, what you now get is a load of crap, basically. And the related links are often nothing to do with the topic at all. Now apparently this is to do with Donald Trump's phrase fake news, and apparently if it's something that doesn't adhere to the official version of events, then that's fake news, apparently. And it says in YouTube's policy for changing all this that they want these subjects to the links to be shown at the top of the listings, which is what most people are going to see, should be from reputable news sources. Now by those they mean mainstream media, which is a bit of a paradox to anyone who's actually studied it. So when you search for these things, you can't find them anymore, and it's a big change if you're doing any research involving YouTube. If you're looking for any videos, it's suddenly become a lot harder. They haven't censored stuff yet, but it's a lot harder to find than it was, and it's made a big difference. I couldn't have found half the videos I found, I don't think, if it was like that now. So I'm glad that I did it a few years ago. So there's always still an ongoing attempt, I think, to shut down conspiracy theorists, these nasty conspiracy theorists. Anyway,
can I just add one point to that?
Certainly.
On one or two of the American sites, the recommendation to overcome this, to sidestep this, is not to use Google as a search site, but to use DuckDuckGo.
Right.
And they haven't sort of altered their search engine.
Okay.
So you might be able to find more than you would otherwise find on Google. So DuckDuckGo.
Yeah.
DUCK?
Yeah.
Some of the others, like Daily Motion, is another one that doesn't seem to have been affected either, but it's a bit cumbersome compared to YouTube when it was good. But point taken, certainly. Right, I was only drafted in sort of as a late speaker, so basically I just was having to think about what can I talk about to you that wouldn't take too long. It's a bit of a quick fire job, this. So it's basically just, these are some of the books I've read since we were last all together a year ago. Always come here and see books on the tables and go away thinking I must read some more books. So I've been busy on ordering these, and basically there's 3 books that I've read in the last 12 months on the subject, JFK assassination, and it's just basically, I'll do a little bit of a synopsis, not too much, but basically just to say a little bit about how they've affected me and how they've moved me and inspired me, because they all have done that. I think they're absolutely cracking books, and I find them very interesting to read. So it's just basically about that. This is the first one of the 3. This is Mary's Mosaic by Peter Janney. How many people have read this? Shall we show of hands? Right.
It's in the pile too.
Okay. It'll guide me on the synopsis. So, hit, miss, or maybe, as they used to say. You think it was any good?
Definitely a hit.
Definitely a hit.
Definitely a hit.
Fantastic. Yeah, I thought so too.
It's another one that goes against the mainstream media.
Very much so.
Version of it.
Yeah. I highly recommend this book for many reasons. So just a little bit of a synopsis. It's written by the author Peter Janney, who actually was, he was a teenager when JFK was assassinated. But he was the son of Wister Janney, who was a CIA officer, and they were neighbours of the Mayers, so he knew Mary Mayer and Claude Mayer and their children. He was best buddies with one of the Mayer's sons, who was tragically killed in a road accident when he was a teenager. So he grew up around these people. He used to go fishing with James Angleton and Claude Mayer, and apparently Angleton was a nasty piece of work going fishing. They called him the Angler. So
They
he
always
was.
try to use dynamite or something.
So he was actually closely related, and I think he was sent to boarding school. And while I was at boarding school, he came home at Christmas to be matter of factly told, "Oh, Mary May has been shot dead." Now Mary May died on the 12th of October 1964, so it's exactly 55 years ago today. And he had, I think, some kind of breakdown, he implies, over this news. I think he was quite taken with Mary. She was quite an inspirational character, as the book will show. And so eventually he began to research this, the murder of Mary Mayer, which was just short of a year after Kennedy's death. And it was another case of, well, she was shot to death on the Chesapeake, Ohio Canal towpath, returning from an art class. A man called Ray Crump was arrested and tried and was quite miraculously acquitted, actually, by a very forward-thinking defence lawyer. And although his life never really recovered, he was essentially another patsy, yet another patsy, same old story, really. But why was it important that, why was her story important? Well, it contains a lot of elements. I mean, going back to Cord Mayer, as a young man, was a political activist. He and JFK both had been tainted by the World War II experiences. You know, JFK with the torpedo, nearly drowning and everything. And Mayer, similarly, was blown to bits by in the Pacific Theatre somewhere as well, I think. And they both came back determined that we shouldn't ever have another war. And it's a little bit that, whereas JFK ends up where he did, Mayer kind of ends up turning to the dark side, where he joins the CIA, and he becomes a top officer in the CIA. But they both started out with similar visions. And the story goes that Mary, these were high society Washington people, they all knew each other, and Mary became a lover with JFK. The book doesn't pull any punches about JFK's love life. It tells it like it is, but it does give you the context that Mary was a bit more special, I think, than that. He thinks that Mary was his true lover and confidant, and that she was who he really trusted, and that he used to tell her about the ongoing political situation that was at the time. And so she was party to information that a Washington society wife or ex-wife by then wouldn't have been necessarily party to, because she separated from Cord Mayer by this point. And she allegedly been in the artistic circles at the time. She got to know Timothy Leary, and LSD was involved in this, that Mary was turned on and to LSD, and in due course it's alleged that JFK may well have had an LSD session himself, and that Mary was intending basically to turn on a group of Washington high society wives, all to try and convince their husbands, who were high hitters in politics or whatever, that peace was the way to go. And then as we go through 1963, of course, we could, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy, according to this story, is backed up by several factors really, that Kennedy was being turned towards peace, and that Mary was a driving force in this. So obviously in the time between Kennedy's assassination and Mary's murder, she allegedly was conducting some sort of investigation, but she certainly was in contact with members of the Kennedys' close circle. It talks about what RFK's real true feelings were about the assassination, that he had a meeting shortly after with John McCone, CIA director, and RFK knew from early on that it was a conspiracy, but couldn't do anything about it. And Mary supposedly was crying to people on the phone, saying he was changing too fast. He was changing too fast, and they got him. And this was her sort of verdict. But obviously, she was murdered, another patsy, and so on and so forth. There's also the story of her diary or sketchbook. There's a bit of doubt about what exactly this was, what it contained, but that Mr. Angleton turns up at the house searching for the diary. Ben Bradley is also involved in that, who was pretty much CIA. And so there was some sort of attempt of destruction of evidence. Moving a long way forward, the first researcher to seriously look into this whole affair was Leo Daymore. Now this is an interesting character. I didn't know anything about him, but his papers, Peter Janney eventually got access to all his papers, but Daymore had interviewed many people, including Timothy Leary, Kenny O'Donnell. He'd interviewed people who were very close to the Kennedy circle. And then the story goes that Leo Daymore himself dies in suspicious circumstances. It was a brain tumour, but there was some doubt about that. Another researcher then called John Davis also investigated the case, and it seems that he was scared of it in some respect as well. But Peter Janney does actually stick to it, and the reason these books are important to me is because the personal journeys, and the personal journey in this case is the author's own story. He had a personal connection, and he goes right through into more recent times, investigating, trying to find out who really did the murder. Well, he comes up eventually with a suspect, which is the jogger on the towpath. This is somebody who was seen leaving the crime scene by witnesses but wasn't stopped by police. Partly because the original reports were of a black man in situ, which may have been a deliberate diversion to allow the real killer to escape. That's his theory. And the suspect, the jogger on the towpath, he gets the name of William Mitchell, and he starts to research William Mitchell. Now, he employed a professional military historian who said this was the biggest. He could never struggle so much to get records of a military. He was a lieutenant, William Mitchell, but it seems that he basically had a legend so thick that even a top military historian couldn't penetrate it. But eventually, they think they've located the man. Janney goes to confront him in person and sort of gets told to go away. So eventually, his only option really open is to take out private prosecution, which would mean that he could then take deposition with a lawyer present from Mitchell. So it's a little bit like the final sort of confrontation. This was in about 2004, so it's not that long ago. And eventually, Janney comes face to face with Mitchell to do these disposition, and he's questioned, and of course Mitchell basically answers no comment. I can't remember to pretty much everything. Doesn't incriminate himself, and unfortunately that's as close as he got. The other gem in the book that I really liked is that Peter managed to unearth some documents pertaining to his father. Now, Mr. Janney, he knew all along that he worked for the CIA, but and that his father didn't like. He was very abrupt when talking about the Kennedy assassination or Mary's murder, and it turns out that Janney was actually quite a high up officer himself, and he found a document that eventually that Janney Senior had chaired a CIA meeting in the mid-late 60s concerning the Garrison investigation, and the minutes of this meeting say he chaired this meeting which said that the CIA felt that Garrison would get a conviction at trial. So just think about that, and what they could do to kind of, how they would react to that. So that was an interesting document he found sort of along the way. So it's a fascinating story. What I'll say is what it's meant to me is it would have made a great movie. I'm just reading, so I haven't seen this for ages, but the blurb on the front says, reads like a John Grisham novel crossed with an Oliver Stone movie. Well, I think it would have made a better movie than Stone. It's got everything. It's got romance, it's got murder, it's got LSD, it's got Cod Mayor on the dark side, and good versus evil. It's been a brilliant murder. Another suspicious death in the case, which is always fascinating, and the author's own personal journey, that his own personal bereavement for Mayor and the Mayor family. It's coming from a different angle to most books. it conveys that JFK was turning to peace and that he was shot down because of this. And to me, it may not all be true, I don't know, but I like to think it is. I think it's a great true story, and it's had a big effect because I think it shows that you should never give up and you should persevere. It's only one little area of the case, but through one man's sort of dedication to that little area, he has unearthed some very important information. So that's book number 1.
He's involved with the SCA as well. Jan.
Worcester.
No, Peter Jan, he was actually in 78, he was involved in doing some of the research for them.
Right, oh, right, okay, right. Book number 2 has already been mentioned not so long ago, which is this one, JFK and the Unspeakable.
Brilliant book.
Good.
Right. Who's going to quick show of hands on who's read this? Most people.
Who thinks it's the #1 JFK book?
Well,
Well,
a
some ways.
definite hit.
In some
Right.
ways.
Right.
It speaks to the
I think it depends what
list of
level.
motivations.
I think as an overall, it's the best.
Yeah, it does
Right.
serve different.
Yeah.
Right, good. I'll preach it to the convert, even better. Right, so I'll keep the synopsis brief because the majority have read it. But basically, again, coming at the case from a more of a theological angle, which again reflects the author's background, and he sets this up by quoting the writings of a monk called Thomas Merton. And Thomas Merton was writing about the political situation prior to Kennedy's death, sort of circa Cuban Missile Crisis. It was about the threat and fear of a nuclear war. And Merton describes this, he comes up with this term, the unspeakable, which he calls a kind of systematic evil that includes such realities as the Holocaust, the Vietnam War, the nuclear arms race, and these assassinations, which Merton calls a void. Now, the unspeakable is a great catch-all for the people that did it, if you like, the perpetrators, the plotters. That's kind of where he comes into it from. It's mainly a book about the political context of the assassination. And I recommend Noam Chomsky read this because he says that there is no political context to the assassination. He needs to read this damn book. It's the best book on the political context, I think. It goes into great detail about the JFK's Vietnam policy and the Cuban policy, of course, which is better documented. Lots and lots about the Vietnam prior to Kennedy's death, the run up to the DM assassination, the coup d'etat in Saigon, Cuban Missile Crisis as well, and documents all the back channel discussions with Khrushchev and then with Castro via William Atwood, and you just come away with this overwhelming feeling that he was so isolated on his foreign policy on all these areas, and these were all going on at the same time, and he was trying to get out. I think there's still people on the internet forums who dispute that JFK wanted out of Vietnam, but I think this book kind of overwhelmingly pushed me towards thinking, yeah, he did want to come out and he did want peace, and it did scare him, and he may have come in more of a Cold Warrior in when he was elected, but after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then his meetings with the Joint Chiefs where it was bombs LeMay and all this, bomb the bastards and all this, and really that he walked out of one meeting saying, something along the lines, the human race is, a big letdown, or however he
call
worded
this
it.
the so-called human
That's
race.
the one, yeah. And the Joint Chiefs with talking about preemptive nuclear strikes, etc. It also details some of the ones that are lesser known, like the steel crisis with Henry Luce. It was a little bit like he'd taken on the oil men that he took on. There was a similar where he tried to cap the steel industry, and they revolted against him, and now he just made enemies of all these establishment figures in so many areas. James Douglas, the author, he comes down on the side of it, that JFK was not responsible for the DM coup, which again has been suggested by some people, and that there were other factors again that JFK was being manoeuvred, was being outmanoeuvred really regarding Vietnam. And then, as we mentioned earlier on, Paul mentioned that when it gets to the actual nuts and bolts of the Kennedy assassination, it picks up on various strands, some of the little sort of curious areas of the case, like the Collins radio, the Oswald sightings, and he possibly moves. I agree, he does possibly move away from his central thesis, but he also covers the Chicago plot in quite a lot of detail, the Thomas Valley one, and that I think shows up very well as a kind of pretext to what actually happened, because again, as you've already mentioned earlier, points out the number of similarities between the Chicago plot and what eventually what actually was carried out in Dallas. So it does kind of link it all together chronologically. So again, it moved me because it was a book that's very convincing in its convictions that JFK was moving towards peace with the Test Ban Treaty to end the Cold War. He saw Vietnam as a quagmire and unwinnable war, which is exactly what it turned out to be. And it's another case that if only, you feel yourself thinking, if only this, he hadn't been assassinated, what would it have been like? It shows how isolated his foreign policy was, presents a strong case for a coup d'etat. And again, his background, he was an anti-Vietnam War protester. Douglas was a man of conviction right the way through, and this phrase, the unspeakable, I think it's great. It's a great catchphrase for describing this unseen, unspoken force that we know is there somewhere, but we just can't quite get at it.
I think his prototype was Curtis LeMay.
Well, yeah.
But also the CIA plotters who just kept DM in power until they decided he was useless, and put somebody else in who turned out to be even more useless.
Yeah. And the rest is history.
Did anybody read the book Vietnam by, what's his name? Very recent.
Newman.
By,
John Newman.
no, British author. Historian. Who? No. What?
No, British author.
British author.
Max
Max Hastings.
Oh, okay.
Read that, because a lot of what Douglas talks about in his book is detailed to a much greater extent about all the nefarious things that went on. And the basic reason why the Vietnamese War was lost was largely because the South Vietnamese government was so corrupt and so useless and badly organized, and it was a clique, it wasn't a government. Even their own people hated them. Couldn't do much about it. And backing a collapsing horse for a big race is not the wisest strategy, really, if you're expecting that. And whereas on the opposite side, the North Vietnamese were certainly no better morally, if not even worse. But they just persisted and persisted and persisted.
Organized.
Didn't care about casualties, didn't care about what they lost in the pursuit of reunification of their country. And Vietnam still suffers from that, 30, 40, 50 years later. But yeah, that's a brilliant book. Max Hastings.
And if you can find, I once found on YouTube where he was actually talking, Douglas, and he was actually more impressive seeing him talk. I don't know if you'll be able to find it anymore, but it was. I wasn't sure how he would come across in the face to face, but his mind was so incredibly sharp. It was really refreshing.
I met him in Dallas, spoke to him, and he's all that.
Good.
Yeah.
Brilliant guy.
The one thing, that the common theme in these books is they all are written from personal experience. And
Yeah.
they talk to the reader, you do get drawn in. Which brings me to the third and final one, which is Girl on the Stairs. Who's read this one? Which is a more recent book, actually. Good book, hit this lady.
Oh, no, definitely good.
It's been out a while, hasn't it?
Yes.
It was first published.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
about
must be
10 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Back all that reason. Not really. Right, I'll talk a bit about this as well, just the synopsis of it. Girl on the Stairs, Barry Ernest is the author. Most of you know, certainly from the work that's gone on in recent years, Prayer Man, etc., about the immediate aftermath in the book depository, that Victoria Adams and Sandra Stiles, for that matter, the Girl on the Stairs is Victoria Adams, were critical witnesses in that they left the book depository 4th floor, I think, within 30 seconds of the last shots being fired. That was what they said originally. Then come down the staircase that Oswald is allegedly descending. Don't see him, of course. This is portrayed in the Stone movie, the illustrated. And then, of course, at the bottom, it gets into the narrative that she saw Lovelady and Shelley in the first floor loading deck. And because we now know, and we've got the video to prove that they went off to the railroad tracks after the assassination, that they're saying, well, she couldn't have come down straight away, she must have seen him 10 minutes later or something like that. And it's sleight of hand, really, how they've just moved the known evidence about a bit to try and discredit the timing. And Barry Ernest is a first-generation researcher, and he became fascinated by this little bit of the story, this one witness, and he knew that her evidence was critical to the case. But the book, to be honest, again, is much more than just about his quest to find Victoria Adams. He originally he interviewed a lot of witnesses firsthand. He assisted Penn Jones Jr. and he assisted Harold Weisberg. In fact, Weisberg was his mentor. He took him under his wing, and it was eventually Weisberg who inspired Barry Ernest to write that book. So it's a kind of a personal journey that he gets to know the good and bad sides of the case, the highs and lows. And he's got some interesting tales of meeting witnesses in Dallas, such as Sam Holland, who arrived with a team of sort of bodyguards and checked him out. Charles Bream as well was a character. So he brings some of these characters to life that we've all read about, but that's all we usually do. We read about them. We don't really know much about people meeting them face to face. Well, he met a lot of these people, and he also met another witness who I can't remember the name of it, but in there was a witness who claimed to have seen Oswald and Ruby together, and he was a chain smoker, a very nervous man, was scared out of his wits basically. But he met all these people, and that was his. And he also began to visit the National Archives many times. This was in the more formative years. He used to be researching with an FBI agent looking over his shoulder and all this. And he's actually the man who found JFK's death certificate, because he used to go there on Weisberg's behalf, figuring that they knew about Weisberg and they were wary of him. So Barry Ernest is the man who found JFK's death certificate signed by Berkeley, and that up to then nobody had been able to find. And over the years, he becomes a bit more disillusioned with it and grows up and gets married, has children, etc. But he never gives up this hope that one day he might find Victoria Adams. And eventually, in 2002, he tracks her down with a bit of help from his son and the internet, and they manage to find her. He corresponds with her, and she's very open and honest. She sticks to her original story. She's consistent. She's happy to tell the story. And it kind of, it gives a nice round feeling to the book that he met, that he eventually got to find her. And ironically, she had at one point, she lived a bit of a nomadic lifestyle at one time. and they actually lived within about 15 miles apart at one point in their lives, but without knowing. But he finds her eventually, and he gets her story down for the record, and then he actually finds Sandra Stiles quite easily then after that, who again tells her original story that they left down just at the minute after the shots, never saw anyone on the stairs. The stairs were very noisy, you'd have been able to hear someone clumping down from whatever, and the timing that is consistent, it corroborates, and that's really all there is to it. But it's much more than that. It obviously the downside to it is that Victoria Adams died tragically in 2007. She died sort of in her early 60s, and he was in correspondence with her around that time, and then really it's just another story that was quite moving and showing that, again, never give up, because perseverance is key. All the witnesses have a backstory of their own. Every member, every person involved in the case has a life and a backstory to tell, and even though it's just one witness, it shows that if you keep at it, then no matter how small a detail, that what can be achieved. So they all have a bit of a similar theme, really, and that's all. I just want to just share the experience I've had of reading them, because you know, I'm a newcomer. I've only been doing this sort of 15 years, and you know, there's a lot to be said for keep reading the books, keep reading anything, because you know, it inspires me to keep going, keep turning up at these things. So that's the presentation.
So can I just add to that what you were saying? You know, I was saying earlier about this woman who was